Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of the dystopian novel They Said There Was. And we're on chapter 27 today. And I don't know if you can see that, but we have a picture of Robert sitting on his bed. He looks like he's playing with his phone. Chapter 27. He ran out of milk quickly, then butter, and then tea bags, and had to go to the shop for each of these, thinking of Deirdre each time, cursing her for not getting the shopping in before she'd left. He looked at things on the shelves, but none of them seemed to be meals until he discovered there was a big fridge at the far end of the shop and could see packets of things in it with pictures of meals that looked like things he might eat. Burgers, chicken wings, meaty things. They weren't the sort of meat she usually bought, but it was less intimidating looking than the chickens he saw at the bottom of the fridge. He had no idea how long or how to cook them. He'd carved a turkey, of course, each Christmas, but he'd never taken notice of how it was cooked, as there'd been no need to. It went in the oven, but for how long? The things in boxes seemed safer, and some had potatoes in them as well as the meat, the picture showing them with potatoes and peas too. It was disappointing to find that what you get on the box was not always what you got inside, and he made many mistakes with meals that resulted in half the plate being inedible or things being thrown away before they got to the plate at all. Sometimes they stuck to the pan and couldn't be removed. He'd wised up and bought biscuits every time he went to the shop, in case things went wrong at dinner time. The dishes were starting to run out too. He had to put the water on to wash one or two things every time he wanted to eat. Tea towels and cloths you could use to mop spills seemed to be hidden as well, and a hand towel had to be used to dry things. It was boring and difficult to do all that, just eat. He at least could prop the phone up in the kitchen, as Deirdre used to do, listen in to the news whenever he was in there. That passed the time well, while doing the chores that were Deirdre's job. He hoped she'd come back soon and get the house into some sort of shape, as it was looking untidy to say the least. Dishes were her domain, and clothes, and he didn't know how to wash clothes, so these were spilling out of the laundry basket in the bedroom, mostly socks, underwear, and shirts, since he'd only two suits that fitted, and they would need to be worn until she came back, then washed with the rest. In the daytime, he found he was tired enough at times to want to lie down, even though his headaches had eased. He allowed himself a while on the camp bed in the office, which he'd grown to like more than the double bed, which seemed too big somehow and chillier than the small one. Sometimes he'd wake to discover he'd slept right through the news, and an hour or more had passed. He hoped it wasn't some kind of early warning sign that he'd picked up the deadly virus from some unvaccinated type around at the shop. But he woke up during the night sometimes too, which meant he wasn't all that tired, really. He just needed to find more constructive things to do with himself to pass the time. He couldn't think of anything that he wasn't already doing, though. The jigsaw was finished, and he didn't remember experiencing anything that could be described as fun or interesting. While doing that, he thought of his miserable wife taking all the best pieces off to her side of the table. At least he could suit himself for a while now, with her away. The grass in the front garden might need a few more runs over with the mower before the winter set in, and on looking out the window he could see the grass was looking untidy. He donned his weekend uniform for this, as his second suit was starting to smell slightly of body smells. He'd sprinkled some aftershave on it, hoping to disguise it, but he could still detect it. He always worked up a bit of sweat doing the grass, what with dragging the heavy mower around to go up and down in lines, then crossways to get the grass right. He had the best lawn in the neighbourhood, even if Deirdre wouldn't use weed killers and complained whenever it was mentioned. The weeds had to be tackled on the path with soapy water instead, then a wire brush the next day. She usually did that bit. Just a run through of the lawn would do for now. He took a break to get his breath back. He was about halfway through, he could see, and the lines were fairly straight. His top and trousers needed some adjusting, though, as the jumper had rolled up uncomfortably on his back and the trousers down towards his hip bones from the exertion. Why did lawn mowers have to be so big and heavy for tiny blades of grass? Deirdre did hers out the back between the vegetables and herby things with shears, saying the ground was too bumpy and all the stones around her herby weed beds got in the way of a mower. She should have levelled it when they were getting the front garden topsoil done and the grass carpets put down. Saves time. As he was adjusting his trousers and putting the bottom of the jersey, some ridiculous purple thing Deirdre had bought for him, into the waistline to keep it in place for the final push, so to speak, he saw the strange woman again. He saw her while he was trying to get his breathing to slow down and wiping his forehead from the exertion of the work he'd put in. She had the bike again. Still no mask, for the third time, or fourth maybe, by now. She had a large bag that he recognised, because it had a logo of the supermarket his wife bought food at, but it had large logs and branches awkwardly sticking out at angles. She balanced the bike against the wall of the house next door and opened the gate, then walked up the path with the large bag, still very awkwardly managed, with the log falling out, as she leaned to one side under the weight, making her way to the side of the house. She saw him and said hello. He said nothing, but watched her without turning his head. She was coming back, going out the gate again, getting the bike, and heading up the path with it again. Nice day for it. For what? Cutting grass, he supposed. No day is a nice day for wandering about with logs on a bicycle, leaving them about at other people's houses, he thought. She was a cheeky sort. He gave her a look intended to imply this, while fiddling with the handle of the mower to look busy. He started pushing the mower up the garden so he could turn and get a good view of whoever opened the door to her. Would they tell her to put a mask on? You were supposed to wear them if you visited someone's house still, even though you could do that now, the new rule said. She rooted about in her pockets for a minute, then opened the door herself. She had a key. Then she swung the bag of logs inside, throwing sticks after it that had escaped. Next, she wheeled the bicycle inside, lifting it over the small step, bumping it on the door. He could see black streaks on the door, like she did this manoeuvre regularly and didn't care about cleaning the door to keep it presentable for the neighbours. She must live there. Her husband must be a horror, judging by her behaviour, with the mask absent outside and dragging bits of rubbish into the house. He'd seen her with logs before. Why the obsession with dirty logs and bringing them home? Where would she be bringing them from and why? Jesus Christ, People were very strange when you started noticing them. He dug in his pocket for his phone, checking the time he'd seen her. If she kept up this breach of the rules, she might be someone to report. He'd keep a list from now on of all the times he'd seen her, because he'd find out who she was sooner or later, he felt sure. People in the neighbourhood were bound to be objecting to her behaviour and telling her to put her mask on if she was going out like that without it. And that cheeky smile, mocking him. He remembered he wasn't wearing his mask. He hadn't been out on the street, though, risking running into people without a mask on. You couldn't tell who hadn't been jabbed, but he was willing to bet from her actions that she was one of those unjabbed sorts who thought she could get away with it. A visit from police would soon put her straight on that. Maybe she'd even been reported and warned about it before. One more infringement of the rules, and she'd probably get herself arrested. As soon as he'd put the mower away, after checking the lawn had been mowed to his satisfaction, he changed into his suit and got his notebook out. He headed a new page with the title Strange Woman and wrote down the details about time and the mask and the name of their street where she had been outside. Pity she lived right beside him, because she might guess it was him that called police and start an argument with him if she wasn't arrested immediately. He'd jot down sightings, though, for repeat offences, in case she kept doing it. Then they'd have proof of the scale of the problem and take her away. These people needed pressure to put on them to get the jab. He couldn't even be in the garden without his mask now, he realised. She was putting his life at risk just being in his vicinity. There was some confusion still about how far the virus could spread through the air. There was wind speed and all sorts of other factors that you had to take into account. He paused on checking the time on the phone to see when the next news was on to get updates. He'd yet to check the updates for the headlines on a site that changed its news stories several times a day to take account of all the changes that were happening in the world with the pandemic. An advertisement with a happy couple on it, on holiday on a beach, popped up. He wondered what Deirdre was doing. Was she really with her parents at all? Or was she on a holiday somewhere else with one of her friends and not telling him about it? She had one of those metaversal accounts, he knew, because she'd given him the password to it after they'd come back from a holiday on the Amalfi Coast, where the food was atrocious, if he remembered correctly. And she'd wanted him to transfer his photos from the phone to her account to show her friends. He'd done it to shut her up because she'd printed out some of the photos for him at the chemist machine to show at work, to prove he'd been on that rather pricey holiday. It was something of a tradition, he remembered, to compete for who had the best holiday in the Office of Human Resources back in the old times. The old times would be returning soon, and Deirdre, even if she was deceiving him about her whereabouts, would be returning to the old ways as well. He scanned through her page on the site. Photos of the last holiday. Photos of herself with several of her stupid friends, laughing and getting drunk. Jesus, one of them was his own living room. Was nothing sacred? The dates each item had been posted appeared underneath, with some replies underneath her photos and comments about what the photos were of. He didn't see any recent dates or any pictures of her with her parents that were recent ones. She may have remembered he could see the page, though, so that didn't mean anything of itself. There were other things on the page, groups she belonged to. They brought you to other pages. She might be posting there. He forgot about the news and about his lunch for a while. He became quite engrossed in looking through the groups to see if she had posted recently. It was like being a detective. He liked detective books a bit, at least when he used to read more. They always solved their case. Like cowboys, they had to work for it, but usually got the solution once the problem was understood and they got control of it. There was one group he didn't understand the purpose of. It was called Meta Friends Meetup and said something about avatars and games. He didn't see any games on the page at all, though, just comic book pictures and links to other things. He clicked one of those and it brought him to something called the Meta Friends Forum. Chapter 28. The forum turned out to be quite interesting because there were some headings in the section called Topics about the Pandemic. And when you clicked on them, you could see all kinds of people talking about the rules in different parts of the world and what they thought was going to happen next, and how many people they knew personally that were sick and how many not with the virus. There were a lot of back and forth arguments between people that all had funny names too. Some of them were saying they didn't want the jab and some did. His wife might be one of them for all he knew, using a funny name and a picture of a comic book character. There were a lot of pictures posted in the thread with characters that were like comic heroes, the sort with superpowers in colourful outfits, or dressed up as cats with tails sticking out the back, or robots. People were saying that was their character. He supposed it was like kids pretending to be cowboys and Indians, which was a bit stupid for adults, but the conversations were informative about how people who didn't want injections thought. They were mad people, and his wife was probably talking to all these people behind his back. He created a new account on the forum because you couldn't see all the posts unless you did that, and he didn't seem to be still signed in under his wife's account. He was asked what name he wanted and decided on Buffalo Bill 73 because he liked cowboys, and apparently a lot of others had wanted to be Buffalo Bill as well, so he had to use one of the suggested numbers after the name to use it. He was asked to put a photo up for his avatar, as they called it, and they had a choose one option that you could pick something. He saw one with the cowboy hat in the gallery of pictures that appeared and liked it immediately. It was a man that was unshaven and rough-looking under his cowboy hat, but he was squinting in front of a sunset that he was probably about to ride off into on his horse. Now there was a holiday. This was fun, getting to be a cowboy for a day. Now he could talk to people about the pandemic and find more sources of information that he could debate back and forth with, using all the new knowledge he picked up from news and those panel discussions he enjoyed so much. And he also had his notebook of stats that he copied from websites to quote. This might fill in a few more hours during the day or evening between interesting news things on radio or the screen in the living room. There were a few weeks maybe until the world went back to normal and he would be called back to work. Deirdre came back the following week. She rang first. He knew she would, and felt it was a minor victory when he saw her name appear on the screen, on taking the ringing phone out of his pocket. She looked flustered when she arrived. He'd noticed her car pulling in, and she spent a long time outside, looking for something on the seats and in the boot of the car that she didn't find, because when she locked the car, her arms were empty, and she just had the handbag slung over her shoulder, by the strap to hold. Probably forgot to put some silly bauble she'd brought home or some of her mother's awful cooking in the car before she set out. He didn't move from the window. Let her do all the work. He was looking down at his phone screen to show he was busy when she walked in. "I've come to get my things, Robert, unless you're prepared to talk to me about this." "About what?" he said. He could feel a smile starting on one side of his mouth, and he let it. "Your job, losing your job and not talking to me all the other times. I was upset too, you know, but you wouldn't let me help you. You cut me out." What the hell was the woman on about? "I didn't lose my job, as you put it. I'm working again now, as I told you I would be." A minor lie, a white lie, as they say, because he would be back at work in another week or two. "What? They gave you your job back? That's terrific, Robert. You must be very relieved." "I'm not relieved," he emphasized the word. "I told you I hadn't lost my job, and you wouldn't believe me." She didn't look convinced by his little lie. She'd see, though, in a week or two when things went back to normal. If she apologised, she might even get a bunch of flowers when the florist opened to show they'd put her nonsense behind and he'd been prepared to forgive and forget. He wouldn't easily forget, though, how difficult and inconsiderate she'd been for so long now, he thought. No, she'd have to earn her way back into his good books. "Why aren't you at work now then, Robert?" He was momentarily stuck for words and hadn't anticipated the directions the conversation would be going in. He faltered too long. "You're not back at work at all, are you, Robbie?" Her face changed, and she made a lunge at him, grabbing his arm, trying to wrap hers around it. "Robbie, I'm sure there's someone you can talk to about it, someone whose expertise is in helping you get past the shock of losing your job. It's a big adjustment to make, and things are opening up again, and you could see the doctor and get him to recommend someone to see." "I'm not a mad person," he was shouting, but who wouldn't, being called mad by a mad woman? He pulled his arm away and retreated to the office, away from her madness. She followed him. She actually walked right into the room. "Robert, you can talk to me then, or I just walk away now." She was blubbering again. He could hear it in her voice. "That would be just fine with me," he said, in a lower voice than before. He'd had it with her games and her madness. No man should have to tolerate that. He could hear her moving about the house. Most of the noise was emanating from the bedroom. There were scraping noises and the noise of the wardrobe closing and noises of her moving about in there, then going back and forth from the living room. It was obvious she was taking some clothes and bits of her other rubbish with her and just leaving him with the mess she'd left behind. She might come crawling back again, more repentant, when she realised she couldn't manage without him. But he was keen for her to get out of the house quickly now. He was getting a ferocious headache, probably from the disruption and noise of her dragging things around, and he'd need to lie down a while to ease it. The tablets were in the bedroom or the bathroom, and he didn't want to risk facing her. She was probably infected anyway. Who knew how many people she'd met up with on her holiday? So it was better to stay well clear of her. He rubbed his fingers across the back of his neck, then his temples, trying to ease the pain. "I'm going. She was in the room again about half an hour later. If you decide you want to talk to sort this out, you know my number. We can meet halfway somewhere and start discussing our problems. Otherwise, I'll just move on with my life on my own. If not, I'll arrange staying out of your life and I'll contact you in a month or so to pick up the rest of my things. Okay? The last bit was a question, but the rest of it was definitely an ultimatum. She was trying to bully him. He turned and looked at her. Her face confirmed it. It was a serious expression with the big frown to try to seem intimidating. It was ridiculous, given her size. Okay, he confirmed. She'd made a trap for herself, trying to bully him, and it had backfired on her. She'd have to beg now before he ever took her back. She left then with a bit of coming and going because there were dragging and scraping noises. When he thought she'd finished, he went out to the hall, then through to the living room when the coast was clear, as they say. She was still at the car, putting her holiday suitcase in the boot and then rearranging things on the back seat. He'd have to tell the neighbours she'd gone on holiday on her own and hope they didn't think that strange if one of them caught him while washing the car or something and asked. He stayed well back from the window, where he wouldn't be seen by anyone. Deirdre was making enough of a show of herself on her own without his participation. Had she been more reasonable, he thought, as he was searching for a fresh hand towel to dry a cup and a plate, and some cutlery with which to eat his dinner off, which he wasn't sure of the contents of yet, she'd have offered to tell him where the things were, like clean underwear and how to use the oven, but no, it was all about her and her whims and emotional outbursts. There didn't appear to be any hand towels left, only bath sheets, and the bedroom looked like a disaster zone when he went in after she'd left. He'd taken to leaving laundry on the floor since the basket was full, and she must have kicked it or something because it had spread further since he'd last seen it. He got a large refuse bag from the kitchen and put the by now slightly odorous washing into it. There was room in the wardrobe for it, since she had removed a lot of things from the racks, and many of his shirts were gone too that he'd worn and put in the laundry bin. So he shoved the bag in, pushing it into shape to close the door on it. The office was still very tidy, and by far the most pleasant room to be in. He considered moving the living room screen in there, but it was too big, and it needed to be plugged into the wall at a special cable box to work. As long as his chair and around it were clear of her junk, he would be happy. His life didn't have to descend into chaos over the next few weeks just because hers was going to. There would be more tears, probably looking for sympathy from her parents until they got sick of her antics and told her to go home to her husband. She'd have her penance, getting the place back into shape after deserting it, thinking the ship was sinking. All along, it was, in fact, her own ship sinking, not his. He smiled at the thought when he imagined her sorting out her mess that she'd created by disappearing when she returned. The news was less interesting in a way because things were opening up again and they were talking about going back to normal a lot. He knew what normal was, so it didn't hold the interest for him that the crisis had. The only interesting thing was that the virus wasn't going away, as they thought it would, but still spreading at an alarming rate. This was currently under control to some extent, they pointed out on many of the newscasts, but they had to watch the rates of infection very carefully, and anyone going back to work would have to perform daily tests to ensure they hadn't caught the virus and be in danger of passing it on, as there was a chance, slight but there, that even when you had been injected, you could catch it again. Several cases of this were starting to emerge now, although accurate numbers on reinfections in the injected weren't yet available. That would be something to listen out for, Robert thought. Might have to up the vigilance about meeting people in the shop and so forth again. Chapter 29. He searched the Metaversal forum later on and posted on one thread that was about the virus and its effects around the world. The evening was stretching ahead of him, and it filled in an hour or two before the second news came on. He'd finished his scrambled egg on toast and had a cup of tea perched beside him on his chair when he noticed several replies to the thread, as he'd heard others calling it, popping up on his phone screen. One of them was from a nurse who had travelled extensively and seen a lot of the damage the virus did in the course of her work. She was terribly traumatised by it and exhausted, she said, but doing her best to carry on for the good of everyone around the world before it wiped out more people. She said people in her line of work had to be very brave to help others. She sounded brave, as she told horrific stories about trying to save lives of people and having to look after their families too, in a way, because the families weren't allowed to see the infected in the wards. She was a mediator as well as a nurse, and it was part of her job to care for families and victims of the virus. Others had replied to her on the thread, and he was surprised that she was so interested in talking to him. Of course, he had some relevant things to say about the statistics and asking her about how many in the wards and where she worked and so on. She said she couldn't say for privacy reasons, but she was on another website of her own and he could talk more to her there about it if he wanted. She was interested in the discussion they'd started about people who broke the rules and said that, as a nurse, she hoped he didn't take offence, but his wife did sound like someone that could indeed be passing the virus along to unsuspecting people. He'd told her about Deirdre and her holiday, and his worry about her lack of concern about rules that were still vital not to break until things went back to normal. Her name was Bruna, maybe because her hair was brunette, which he knew meant dark brown. Her profile avatar on the Metaversal site wasn't a photo, but a picture of a woman in a tight superhero outfit with cat ears on, licking a large lollipop with a pink swirly pattern on. On Bruna's website, though, she was photographed in a mask and what looked like a doctor's coat, and she had long curly hair and very large brown eyes above the mask. He signed up for emails from the site and got an email within minutes. She called him My Buffalo Bill after thanking him for joining her mailing list in her email, which made him laugh. He liked this Bill character and thought of Bruna the nurse, imagining him as the cowboy in his avatar picture. After the news, he'd had messages again from Bruna. She was posting to him in the Metaversal website and wanted a meet-up. He had to ask her what that was, and he took a while to understand it when she told him. Apparently, it was the Metaversal group you joined, and she gave him a link and told him she'd be there. He could talk to her in his avatar, like having a face-to-face conversation, and it was much easier to talk, she said, than just posting comments in the forum. He clicked the link and was told to install an app on his phone, then pick an avatar, which was a bit confusing since he thought he already had one. After a few minutes, though, and filling in some forms, he was Buffalo Bill again, but this time in an avatar that could walk around. It wasn't easy to manage walking, he found out, when he tried to look around in the screen he was now in. He appeared to be in some kind of tropical jungle. Some words appeared on the screen, and Bruna was standing in front of him. She didn't have her avatar from the forum now, but was dressed as a nurse. The rest of the evening was very strange because she invited him to go swimming in a pool that was beside him with a waterfall beside it. He'd said yes, after which she'd suddenly changed into a leopard skin print two-piece swimming thing, and she'd shown him how to jump in the water. It was very easy to do and involved moving a slider bar and pushing little buttons on the screen. When you wanted to say something, you brought up your keyboard to type. He felt oddly invigorated after the evening spent with Bruna, although the time had passed very quickly. He was shocked to see, when she said good night, it was almost 1 in the morning. What a strange evening that had been. He hoped he would see Bruna again, as she seemed very nice. More weeks went by, and the figures hadn't been as hopeful as promised. There was a new worry that those who wouldn't get jabbed were infecting the jabbed at a great rate. There was talk about passports, which you'd have to show to get any service, anywhere, until they got it sorted out, and the death rate started coming down again. It was a wonderful idea, and he talked to Bruna about it a lot when they met in the metaversal virtual play environment, which was what they called the place the tropical forest was in. It would force people to get jabbed if they had to show a jab passport, because they wouldn't be able to go anywhere or do anything if they didn't get it. He thought of the woman next door to him, the one with the bicycle and the logs. She wouldn't be going to the shops with no mask on and no jab certificate to show if they got the new machines put at the door that they were talking about installing at the entrances to everywhere you wanted to go. They worked with your phone. You needed to swipe your phone, showing your vaccine certificate barcode, and it read off whether you'd had your vaccination. These were in the pipeline for getting rolled out and would soon be installed everywhere. The woman next door, his wife, and other non-cooperators were in for a huge shock when they were told by the machine that they couldn't come in because they hadn't been jabbed, or the thing that took a picture of your face detected that you weren't wearing a mask. He giggled at the thought that his world seemed to be opening up more, while theirs was closing in on them. Bruno was a wonderful person, really caring and considerate. She was always asking about him and trying to please him. She even wanted to know what outfits he liked on her avatar, and wanted to know if he thought she was beautiful. He didn't like to mention it, but it was hard not to notice her large chest in the different swimsuits she wore, and her tiny waist and long legs. She had very shiny lips and huge eyes, and a way of shimmying back and forth when speaking to him that made him feel very attracted to her. Why not be? Deirdre was so different and so much trouble compared to Bruna, who really cared about him and thought he was wonderful. She was always telling him so. She gave him another picture of her by email, and she really did look like her avatar. She was leaning down in her nurse uniform, smiling, and had the big shiny lips and doe eyes, and you could see right down the front of her uniform, with most of her ample breasts showing. He hadn't felt anything that could be called passion for a while, but Bruna certainly knew how to inspire it. Bruna appeared to be falling in love with him, in fact. She could see all his cowboy qualities, he thought. They were able to talk so well, and when he ran out of things to talk about, she didn't. She sometimes didn't turn up for a few days, having told him she had to fly somewhere to do nursing in hospitals that desperately needed staff to cope with the deaths. But she usually told him where she had been afterwards. They were all in very exotic locations, and she was obviously very good at her job. She pointed out that although she was very skilled and experienced at looking after people, her pay was very bad. And she often was expected to pay for her own flights, although she got paid back later by the hospital she was flying to work at. In fact, she had a problem, she told him, about a particular hospital in Africa she was going to. She'd have to change flights a few times to get to the location and also hire private transport to reach the clinic for poor people that needed vaccinations herself. Her rent was due at the same time, and she didn't know how to pay for both. The flights were very expensive, but she could be thrown out of her accommodation at home in Brazil, apparently. She'd shown him pictures of herself on a beach, and it and her looked beautiful. If she didn't pay the 2 months' rent she already owed, and the current month's rent as well, she seemed to not know what to do. She had half the money, but not enough. He thought about it the next day, because she said she was busy trying to find the money somewhere. Even the news didn't take his mind off her. He missed her, and he realised this meant he cared about her. She was a better woman than Deirdre. That was a given. Deirdre didn't deserve him, and Bruna had hinted that she wanted to visit him or bring him on holiday with her as soon as the pandemic was under control and the last of the unvaccinated made have their jabs. He'd liked that. Who needed Deirdre when Bruna was there? Deirdre would regret her behaviour when she found out he was with another woman and didn't want her back. He pictured himself and Bruna together. He couldn't imagine her in ordinary clothing, but she would probably be in her nurse's outfit, a lot of the time anyway. They would still have 2 wages coming in instead of 1, or what was left of his savings for the moment if Bruna moved in. He'd just done the monthly budget and had dipped into his savings to pay off the lot. His last paycheck went quicker than usual, now that Deirdre and himself weren't splitting the food bill. Deirdre was probably having a fine time leeching off her parents, while the house fell around Robert, waiting for the women's chores to be done. Bruna had said recently how much she loved housework, and he'd remembered this little comment that she'd laughed at, saying, "I'm silly, aren't I?" But he didn't think that was silly at all. He needed the housework done badly, he thought, as he looked around at the mess of plates and cups and remembered the laundry to be done and the shortage of socks. He'd have to get to grips with the washing machine and do some dishes himself, he supposed, if Deirdre didn't come crawling back. But it wasn't his job. That was women's work he shouldn't have to do, and not at all like putting the bins out or washing the windows or the car or even doing the front lawn. Bruna would be great for all that, and, he thought, very nice to have around. He felt it twitching in his trousers and adjusted himself, lingering for a moment while thinking of Bruna in her leopard skin bikini, and then her nurse's outfit, bending down, smiling. By the time Bruna messaged him again, he'd already decided to help her out with some money before she'd even asked. What she was doing was vital work, and anything he could do to help the world get back to normal would also help him. She was very grateful and gave him an address to wire the money to. It wasn't in Brazil. He didn't know her address, but it was at some halfway point, as she had to get to Switzerland first, then change flights. She needed a lot of money, but air travel could be expensive, so it was only to be expected. He promised to send the money the next day, and it went without a hitch, with the man behind the post office counter showing him how to fill out the form. He noticed with satisfaction that people were being asked to show their vaccination passports before being served at the counter, and he held his phone up to the glass screen between himself and the masked man behind the counter to show he was vaccinated. His phone beeped as he was pushing buttons on the washing machine, trying to understand how it worked. He thought it was the machine springing to life, then understood it was his phone. Bruna was in Metaversal, sending him a direct message, saying she had missed her flight. It would be a few days until she could get the next flight on the next leg of her journey, but she had paid for the flight and needed money for a hotel. Could he help again, please? They arranged how to get more money to her, and she promised she would talk to him to let him know she was booked into a hotel as soon as she could. He sent the money she needed.